Hello. I don't know if the video is working, but nothing I can do about it from this end. You know, I always just kind of sit here for a minute or two after I'm scheduled to start and just sigh really, really, really deeply, trying to find out where exactly I'm supposed to start and where I'm supposed to be jumping into. Because, man, from like probably 15, 20 minutes before I start, it's like my mind just gets wiped. And so, man, it's just been getting more and more severe too. And I've known for the last couple of weeks what it was I wanted to talk about. And I woke up this morning and I just had nothing in my head. Like, I had the topic and that was it. I had no springboard. I had absolutely nothing. But what God has really been working with me on lately is just defining His grace, His strength as a substitute for what we think we can do. When we hand ourselves over to God, man, He's not expecting us to do it ourselves. It's pretty simple. He went to all this length to make sure that we could have a functional relationship with Him. But He's not going to stop with just giving us that opportunity. He's going to teach us how to work with Him, how to give ourselves over to Him. And that's really, that's something that I think is grossly overlooked in religious circles, well, everywhere. Like, I've just been absorbing 2 Corinthians, and I was reading Galatians some before that. And Paul talks a lot about grace, and it's different facets of grace. Kind of like how there's different flavors of ice cream, you know? They're all made by the same person, but you can have like 40 different kinds, and they're all different. They all fulfill a certain need, if you will. Like in Galatians, Paul talks about, he warns them about don't receive the grace of God in vain. That grace he was referring to was salvation. And there's another grace in 2 Corinthians 8. Man, I love that book. He's talking about the grace bestowed on the Macedonians, this grace of prosperity, of giving. The funny thing, though, when he's talking about money, he talks about equality. But the kind of grace I'm wanting to focus on right now, today, is just the kind, it's like breadcrumbs that bring us into maturity. Like when I first got filled and started learning how to pray in tongues, man, there was a grace. I was dumb as a brick, but I was listening to Dave Roberson, Gary Carpenter. I listened to these people talk about their experiences with praying in tongues and their adventures with God. And it was something that I knew I wanted. And my heart was just so in it and so innocent and so dumb. All I was doing was what I was told worked. And man, there was a grace there in that innocence. It allowed God to just come in and keep proving Himself to me until I finally learned how to start moving forward myself. Oh. But that grace was meant to be temporary. It was supposed to be a crutch until I learned how to establish myself in that and take the next step. And then God was going to start getting something else across to me, and then something else. And I was going to learn how to cement these principles, this knowledge, this wisdom that God's trying to get across to me, that He's trying to impart to me. Learning how to make them a part of me, how to incorporate that into a lifestyle of holiness. But it's progressive. Man, I'm nowhere near where I was 10 years ago, and thank God for that. But, well, I started out with just an innocent hunger, and then I started learning how to be a little more discerning and a little more discerning. But God worked with me where I was at, because my heart was to keep making progress. It was to keep moving towards Him, to keep conforming to His image, to be looking in a mirror that reflects Jesus and not forgetting what I look like. That kind of grace, that reminds me of the manna. You know, when God brought the Jews out of Egypt, and then He just let them wander around in the desert, like all over, everywhere, which way, for 40 years. Well, that old mentality died off, but His grace was there every day with manna and water, with that provision. But in this case, man, it's not about physical needs as much as it is learning how to apply the spiritual, I want to say spiritual gifts, but I mean, it's not the 1 Corinthians kind, just that what Jesus did to everything that Jesus had to go through and that God had to put up with throughout the Old Testament, all provided an avenue for God to give us gifts in our spirit. Gifts like, man, almost like Christmas time, not gifts like all the ones that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. It's not those kind. It's just the kind that stay with us. It's like just spiritual provision. And it's, you know, I don't know how far the likeness to the manna goes, but it's progressive, man. Wherever that cloud and the fire, wherever that went, they followed. There was provision there. They couldn't just camp and expect provision, and then they watch God just go marching off into the distance and then wonder why they don't have any provision the next day. Or they'll gather too much provision and it'll rot. It'll turn toxic. It'll go rancid. It will breed worms and stinketh. And if you keep abusing this kind of grace, that is exactly what's going to happen to a person's spirit. Man, that's why we got to deal with gold dusting and the sounds of thunder in sanctuaries where there's powerful spiritual movings. Those spirits are not God. People can't discern that because they just found a spot to start camping out at in God's grace. When God moved on, they just stuck there. Demons came, started tickling their ears, you know, blah, blah, blah. You're okay. You just stay here and I'll help you learn how to stick a quarter on the wall, because that's the glory of the Lord. That's garbage, man. Those are demons. So this grace, it is it's like, well, it's a journey, like, you know, like what the Bible says. It's like going for a walk with God, except you don't go in a loop. It's a progressive thing, man. Line upon line, precept upon precept. There is... When I first moved here, I was so gullible and naive, and I was just, man, I was the definition of spiritual fodder. But after a year and a half, 2 years of living here, I see all these other people like just fall into the wayside or just start getting weird or distracted or whatever. And so finally I sat down with God and I was like, hey, what's the difference here between me and them? Because I don't see one, and I feel like they were ahead of me spiritually. I mean, what's the difference? Why does it seem like I am better off than what is happening to them? And I still got this word somewhere in my phone, but God, I really can't stand Christian buzzwords and metaphors, but back then there was really no other way for God to get it across to me. And so I was asking these questions like, why isn't more bad stuff happening to me? And he was like, it's what stuck with me the most was the first couple of sentences. It was, there are no predators in your field. Like there's no wolves trying to get to the sheep, there's no birds trying to get the seed out of my heart. However you want to say it, the predators were stuck outside because of the grace of God. Because where I had fastened my heart to Him in innocence and just a hunger to grow in Him, that allowed Him to really do a lot of things on my behalf. And that included keeping a lot of the demonic things at bay. Like when Jesus told Peter, Satan has been asking to sift you like wheat, and he's been asking for a while now. But I prayed for you. That's grace. That's this kind of grace. You gotta remember, there is a myriad of different kinds of grace. But this is the kind that is just, man, it's supposed to be a crutch. You use a crutch when your foot's broken, but your foot's supposed to get better. And, God telling me that there was no predators in my field, and His grace, and my prayer and people praying for me was what really allowed Him to just have such a larger umbrella of protection over me as I was learning how to grow up. And then more and more there's been more assaults, and it's been things that God has been able to spell out to me because that grace has been what's teaching me. Because I take that and I learn how to apply it, and it just becomes me, and then God's able to give me something else, and I move on with that, and I learn how to adopt that into me. I just absorb it. And that's how God gives us substance. Man, there's every man's work will be tried by fire. Let me backtrack and pretend I did not go down that path. Not that it was wrong, I just found a better one. In 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about how he has been avoiding them, lest he find them such as they don't want to be found. In all kinds of just juvenile, carnal sin, unforgiveness, contention, strife, ambitious motivations or dealings. I forget how he said. There was a long list of them. But he actually avoided going to them for that sake, so they wouldn't have to, so they would have time to deal with it before he did show up and have a chat with them about attaining holiness. Because that is a fire. That judgment, man, that if our heart's pure and we're doing what we know we need to be doing, we have absolutely no reason to be afraid of judgment. Man, then in that case, it'll be more like a commendation. God's like, oh, hey, Good job. You survived. Otherwise, man, if we have been neglecting our conscience, the way God talks to us, if we have been ignoring what we know we need to be doing, that is when we want to stick our head in the sand. And that is what God is trying to get us out of with this grace. Man, it's a matter of learning how to step forward with His help. Like a parent helping their kid learn how to walk or how to ride a bike. You know, they're right there, but they're not supposed to be there forever. I don't still have my mom or my dad having me, like, picking me up in my armpits and holding me up just so I can learn how to walk. That that was good for a time, and it was necessary for a time, but it was also meant to be very short term. And that's what God expects out of us, man. He's got all this stuff in store for us that He wants to give us, and He's trying to grow us up. And we think it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Man, you know where God's been getting me to now? It's just getting over myself. There's been a handful of things that He's been getting across to me lately, but the biggest one, going through 2 Corinthians, man, Paul just lights into the Corinthians again, and he's talking about how Jesus was crucified in weakness, but now the life He lives, it's the power of God that is the conduit of life in Him. That is what's keeping Jesus alive, man. It's that very thing. It's the power of God. And that is what Paul said he is striving to, him and his little entourage, you know, Titus and Silvanus and all those other people. They are striving to be weak so the power of God can consistently be manifest in them. So it can be a lifestyle with them, just like it was for Jesus. Man, Jesus didn't live like He had much to prove. And what keeps coming to mind, man, when I think about that, is in Acts, when Paul was, when he was being detained by the Jews, and then this one guy started getting on his case, and Paul lit into him. He's like, man, you're a whitewashed tombstone. And then somebody punches him or slaps him or something. There's some kind of facial contact with a hand. And then this person that smacked him, they're like, hey, did you know you're talking to the high priest here? And then Paul's like, oh, my bad. The Bible says, don't talk evil of those people. You know, I paraphrase, but that's the gist of it. Man, I do not think that I have that kind of humility yet. Well, I know I don't have that kind yet, but that is exactly what I'm striving to. But the steps I'm on now, man, God is imparting grace to me for pulling down all these walls that my pride just decided to build for me. The things, this pride that's keeping God in me and not putting a lamp in a basket, if you will, that kind of thing. That's what's going on, and that's what I'm learning how to deal with. How to remove the basket from the lamp, or how to transplant that city and put it on a hill. That's what I'm learning how to do now. And there is some steps that honestly I would just rather not take. But I see the end result, man, and I can just, like, at one point you just know God has just stuffed the necessary strength in you to be able to come to a decision. Like, you know, you come to that fork in the road, you're like, well, I can insult this person for being a tool, or, well, I can pray for this person because obviously they have low self-esteem. And so far I'm still taking the former road so much more than the latter, but it's becoming more and more evident to me, and there's that tick in my heart that just points out, it's like, well, hey, it's not that hard to be going this way now, so get over yourself. And that's God's grace, man. It's empowering the Holy Spirit with my conscience to be able to start pointing me in the right direction and to empower me to make these decisions. And it's a lot easier to make the decisions when you know it's not you. And a lot of it just has to do with personally, just with my thoughts and the avenues that they go down. Now, like man, last week there was some times where I was doing really, really good. And, you know, I'd have these opportunities come to me, and I'd be like, oh, man, I'm gonna stick with God. And then there was a couple times where I kind of face-palmed God and went in the other direction. But thank God He didn't hold that against me, because you know, He applies that kind of grace too. And it's that mercy, man, that kindness that leads us back to repentance. Man, you end up going down the wrong way for a while, and then you're like, wait a second, why is God way over there? And then you start trying to make amends with God. It's like He's right there, just buddying right back up with you to bring you back on track. That's grace. And what's been on my mind, wait, no. I haven't read Hebrews in I don't know how long, but just this verse, verses Hebrews 4, 15 and 16. You know, the whole book's good, but just I'm going to focus on these two. For we don't have a high priest who can't sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. So, well, actually, even before that, verse 13, and there is no creature hidden from His sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of Him to whom we must give account. Well, let's go on. Seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we don't have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. You know how much more relatable that makes Jesus? It's like, God, you know, I'm struggling with this stupid, petty little thing, but you did too, so let's talk. And in case we screw up, we can actually read the rest of that chapter. Verse 16. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. That mercy, man, that asking for forgiveness, getting our heart set right back with God, or set back right, getting our heart properly aligned with the good Lord, is really the first step, and that is what allows God to impart that grace to us to do better next time. And even if we suck next time, mercy, grace, and then we step forward. It's okay to screw up, man. God is not without forgiveness, and He's not without mercy, and He's certainly not without grace. But that doesn't give us an excuse to use grace to screw up, knowing that God's going to forgive us. Like, well, yeah, I can go over here, man. It's cool. I'll do this and this and this, and you know, it might ruin my testimony for Jesus. But hey, I can get forgiveness. That's not what it's about, man. It's about should our weak knees get exposed and we crumble to sin, we entertain the thoughts, we keep entertaining the thoughts, and we start entertaining potential and possibilities of how to bring those thoughts into reality, and lo and behold, sin is conceived. It's not about entertaining those thoughts. It's about just, man, whenever it happens, pick yourself back up, get right with God, and move on. We can fall 1,000 times. God's still there to help pick us back up. But we have to want to be able to move on with Him. Man, God only knows how many years I've struggled with certain things, man, and still do. There's been so many times I have just brought myself to Him, just empty and dejected and ashamed. And He was still there with open arms, because part of me did not want to stay there forever. So, bringing it home. Again, in 2 Corinthians. I love that book. Paul rhetorically asked the Corinthians there towards the end of the book, don't you know your own relationship with Jesus? Test yourself. And it's up to us to know our own individual relationship with Jesus, because it's not going to be a class action judgment thing here. It's not going to be a group of people. It's going to be God, and it's going to be me. And I'm responsible for what He's given me to do, not all the good things I could be doing, not all the good things anybody else could be doing. I'm not even responsible for a while there, I really struggled with making sure people in my sphere were being proactive about their relationship with God. And man, I was taking it personal to the extent that it was bringing me down. I mean, it was messing with the peace in God that I'm learning how to make a lifestyle out of, that I'm learning how to establish in myself. Oh, that was so deep, I forgot where I was going with it. But, no, yeah. All I'm responsible for in those cases is making sure that what God has given me to impart, that gets imparted to Him. Then, what more can I do, man? I have basically put the ball in God's court, man. I fulfilled my end of the deal, and then it's up to God. But man, I took a lot of personal responsibility for trying to make sure that they were doing what God was wanting them to do. And I'm learning how to not do that. Not that I shouldn't take some responsibility, just in the fact that it's somebody within my sphere that God has made me responsible for imparting truth to. God has asked me to steward their souls, even if only for a time, until they are to the point where they know enough. It's between them and God then. I'm not responsible for what somebody else does with the truth that God gave me to impart to them. And that has been so liberating as long as I learn how to stay away. When I was asking God one time, dude, because I was hurt really badly by a couple things, God just straight up told me, He's like, hey, you are investing too much of yourself into what's going on. What you got to do, man, is just stick with me and just be a conduit. Invest me into these people. And then it'll hurt, man, but at least then you'll know they rejected me and not you. And that was, that didn't make it any easier to cope with, but it was it was something I could see down the line that was encouraging for the future. That was something to do different next time. Adjustments to make. And there's been grace for that. But whatever God has been putting on your heart to do, you just ask Him for the grace, man. You'll feel like something just kind of took up residence, and it's just amplifying your born-again nature. You get an opportunity to go away from God, but there's something in you, man, that's just pulling you a little more to go towards God. And yeah, it's still our decision. But we don't make these decisions in ignorance anymore. it's a lot more humbling to ask for forgiveness then. Oof. When we know we have in us what it takes to not screw up, and then we go against our conscience anyway, it is much more humbling to go to God then. But if that's how we mature, man, that's the path we need to take. God's got this grace like breadcrumbs, man. It's he's got the grace, to step out just a little bit further, and we take that step. And then he's got the grace for one more little step, and then we take that step. And then all of a sudden, months later, years later, we look back and we're like, I used to be way back there. God's trying to strengthen the knees of the entire church. Because he's trying to strengthen the knees of the entire church, not just of this individual person or that individual person. We're not all supposed to ride the coattails of Dave Roberson or Gary Carpenter or Greg Boyd or whoever else. Man, we are supposed to ride in their wake for a time as we learn how to establish ourselves. But what God's wanting to do in the earth, he's not going to do with just a handful of people. It's a matter of letting them blaze the trail and be an example, just like Jesus was an example. It's about us learning to attain strength between us and God, and not piggybacking off of other people, because God has got nothing to work with when you do that. When you make a lifestyle out of it, you can do it for a time. Yeah, there's grace for that, but you don't make a lifestyle out of it. And then you start just falling prey to demonic spirits trying to pose as angels, as God. Man, there is a lot of people can discern spiritual things, but when they just set up camp and God's grace keeps asking them to keep moving on and moving on, there's spiritual things that will come to them, but they won't be of God. And more and more and more and more of that is going to be what's popping up. And if we can't hear God for ourselves, we're going to fall prey to that. And even the elect will be deceived, if that's possible. Well, many are called, but few are chosen, huh? Man, we got to get strong in ourselves so we can stand up underneath what's coming. Because what's coming is not going to be pleasant to the flesh. But once we establish ourselves in the Spirit, it's going to be like swimming downstream. Once we make that kind of lifestyle, that ain't going to be no thing. But we need to latch on to God's grace and let him help us grow up individually, man. And it's going to take individual sacrifices. Letting God re-identify us. The life we used to live pre-Jesus ain't the life God's wanting us to live now. And so there's got to be a momentum shift. And yet we can all acknowledge that, but a lot of us have a lot of inertia behind that momentum. And there's going to be some screwing up as we learn to slow that part of our soul down and learn how to start putting it in submission and steering it back on the right course with God. That's what God's mercy and God's grace is for, man. God knows what it's like to be tempted. Jesus knows what it's like to be tempted. But he had a head start on us because he didn't have to deal with this, with the dead nature like we do now, man. He got a head start on us. But he still knows what it's like to be tempted. That makes him so much more relatable. All that being said, I do believe I am done for today. So, see you guys in a couple weeks, and see what adventures God has been putting me on with myself then. Because, man, it's been 6 weeks or so since those tornadoes. It feels like it's been a week. And I start thinking I couldn't have done all this stuff in a week. But, man, God has dumped so much on me, it's like I got no concept of time anymore. I'm just basking in it and learning how to adopt it and assimilate it and absorb it. And, so, sorry if I have not gotten back with you in a timely manner. I have not forgotten. I am just so lost in trying to learn how to grow up. Anyway, closing again. Ask God, man. He will impart that strength to you. You'll be able to keep growing up. That's how I got to where I'm at, because I did not used to be this way, I promise. I got several people that'll vouch for me on that. But really, this time I'm leaving. So, love you guys, and I will see you later.